I'm Daniel Carter, and that evening I thought my life was finally calm. I got the promotion today, I told Emily while we sat on the couch. She smiled and said, I'm proud of you. I laughed. I'm proud of us. She squeezed my hand. Dinner at your parents'? Yeah. Big night. Wedding talk. She hesitated. They'll like my ideas. They already do, I said. At my parents' house, Mom hugged me. Danny, you're late. Traffic, I said. Dad shook my hand. Good to see you, son. Lucas leaned on the doorframe. Still the golden boy? I smiled. Always. He smirked. We sat. Emily opened her folder. So, we're thinking October. Mom nodded but didn't meet my eyes. October is nice. Dad said, budget? I said, we're covering most. Lucas said, must be nice. Emily cleared her throat. Guest list first. She passed pages. Lucas watched her too closely. I noticed then ignored it. Mom said, church or garden? Emily said, garden. Dad said, weather? I said, we'll plan. Lucas said, or elope. Everyone laughed except Emily. She fidgeted. I whispered, you okay? She said, yeah. Mom poured tea. Daniel, are you sure about the ring size? I said, perfect. She finally looked at me then away. Lucas leaned forward. Emily, what about music? She said, soft. He said, like you. She looked down. I frowned. Hey. Lucas raised his hands. Joking. Dinner ended. Dad said, good talk. Mom said, drive safe. In the car, Emily was quiet. Everything okay? I asked. Just tired. I said, big day tomorrow? She nodded. Big. At home I cooked. Sit, I told her. She Saturday, Daniel, she said, you ever think life changes fast? I laughed. We control it. She didn't smile. Promise me something. Anything. Protect our future. I said, always. Later my phone buzzed. Lucas, good night, champ. I replied, night. Emily went to shower. I sat on the bed and took out the ring. I said to myself, I'll protect us. She came out. Still staring at it? It's our future. She nodded. Daniel, I love you. I love you more. We lay down. She faced the wall. You cold? I asked. No, I touched her shoulder. We'll be okay. She said nothing. Morning came too fast. Coffee? I asked. Later. She dressed. Work early? Yes. She kissed my cheek. See you. Drive safe. At work, Kevin said, you look happy. I am. He said, wedding soon. October. He grinned. Lucky man. I said, best life. That night I texted Emily. Dinner? No reply. I called. Nothing. I told myself, she's busy. I went to my parents' place to drop off the folder. Mom opened. Oh. Just dropping this. She took it. Thanks. I heard Lucas's voice inside. Who is it? Mom said, Daniel. Silence. Tell him we're busy, Lucas said. I waited. Mom said, maybe tomorrow? I nodded. Sure. In the car I felt strange. I called Emily again. No answer. I whispered, it's fine. At home I stared at the ring. I'll protect you, I said. I had no idea I was about to lose everything. I called Olivia. Hey, I said. She answered, what's up? Did you feel weird at dinner? She paused. A little. Mom wouldn't look at me. She's stressed. Lucas. He's intense. Emily seemed off. Olivia sighed. Maybe nerves. Yeah. Danny, she said, whatever happens I'm here. Thanks. Promise me you won't disappear. I won't. She said, good night. Night. I set the phone down. I opened my notebook and wrote, we will be okay. I said it out loud. We will be okay. Tomorrow everything begins, I thought, holding hope like fragile glass tightly. Forever. I left work early that day, smiling, already dialing Emily. Surprise? I said when voicemail picked up. I'm home soon. I stopped by the bakery. The girl asked, birthday? I said, just love. She smiled. Good reason. I drove fast, heart light. At the apartment I called out, Emily? No answer. I stepped inside. Quiet. Too quiet. I walked to the bedroom. The closet door was open. Her suitcase was gone. The drawer with her sweaters was empty. I whispered, No, my chest tightened. I ran to the bathroom. Her makeup bag was missing. I checked the kitchen. Her mug was gone. I grabbed my phone. Emily, call me. I dialed again. Straight to voicemail. I said, where are you? I sat on the couch. My hands shook. This isn't funny. The door opened. I stood up. Emily? It was Lucas. He walked in slow. Hey, champ. I said, where's Emily? He closed the door. We need to talk. My voice cracked. Where is she? He looked at me and said, she left, with me. The room went silent. I laughed once. That's stupid. He said, I'm serious. I stepped closer. You're lying. He shook his head. We're together. I said, call her. He said, she doesn't want to talk. I pushed past him. Get out. He blocked me. Listen. I shoved him. Get out. The door opened again. Mom and Dad walked in. Mom's eyes were red. Dad's face was stiff. I said, tell me this isn't real. Mom whispered, Daniel, they love each other. I stared at her. What? She said, we tried to stop it. Dad said, it just happened. I said, since when? Lucas said, a while. My head spun. I said, you knew? Mom nodded. I said, you knew and didn't tell me? She said, we didn't know how. I laughed again louder. You didn't know how? Dad said, be a man and let it go. I looked at him. Let what go? He said, Emily chose. I said, with my brother. He said, yes. I said, in my house. He said, calm down. I said, you all lied. Lucas said, don't make this harder. I said, harder for who? He looked away. I called Emily again. Pick up. Nothing. I put the phone on speaker. Emily, it's me. Voicemail. Please. I texted. Where are you? No reply. I said, answer me. Silence. My chest felt crushed. I said, how long? Mom said, months. I said, while I planned a wedding? Dad said, yes. I said, while you smiled at me? Mom cried. Daniel? I said, don't. Lucas said, we didn't mean to hurt you. I said, you already did. I walked to the bedroom. The empty closet stared back. I touched the hanger. I said, she took everything. Mom said, she'll call. I said, no she won't. I went back. You all chose him. Dad said, he's older. I said, so I don't matter? Silence. Lucas said, I'm sorry. I said, no you're not. He said, I am. I said, then leave. I grabbed my jacket. Mom said, where are you going? I said, away from this. Dad said, Daniel? I said, don't follow me. I opened the door. My legs shook. Mom cried. Lucas said nothing. I stepped outside. The sky felt too bright. My phone buzzed. Nothing from Emily. I whispered, you were my life. I walked without looking back, shaking, empty, and invisible. I slept in my car that night. The seat was cold. The windows were fogged. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and said, this can't be real. My phone sat in my lap. No messages. No calls. I whispered, please? Nothing. Around midnight I started crying. Not quiet crying. The kind that shakes everything inside. Why? I said out loud. What did I do? I hit the dashboard once. What did I do wrong? My voice cracked and I laughed at myself. You idiot. I replayed Emily's smile. Emily's laugh. Emily's promise. I said, you told me you loved me. I closed my eyes. I saw Lucas at the table. I saw Mom looking away. I saw Dad's face when he said, be a man. I said, I was. I must have fallen asleep because knocking woke me. I opened my eyes. Kevin stood outside. Daniel. I unlocked the door. He said, you didn't come home. I said, there is no home. He crouched beside me. What happened? I tried to speak. Nothing came. My chest shook. Kevin waited. Finally I said, Emily left. He said, left where? I said, with Lucas. He stared. Your brother? I nodded. He said, that's a joke. I said, I wish. He opened the passenger door and Saturday talk. I said, they all knew. He said, who? I said, my parents. He swore. That's messed up. I said, I planned a wedding. He said, I know. I said, I trusted everyone. He said, you should. I laughed. Not anymore. He said, did Emily say anything? I shook my head. Nothing. He said, that's cruel. I said, I feel replaced. He said, you weren't. I said, she chose him. He said, that doesn't make you less. I said, it feels like it. We sat. Kevin said, you can crash at my place. I said, not yet. He nodded. You need food. I said, I'm not hungry. He handed me a bottle of water. Drink. I drank. He said, what are you thinking? I said, every memory. He said, which one hurts most? I said, the promise. He said, what promise? I said, she said we'd protect our future. He said, she broke it. I said, so did my family. He said, that's on them. My phone buzzed. I froze. I looked. Kevin leaned closer. The message said, I'm sorry. That was it. I typed, why? Then erased it. I typed, where are you? Then erased it. I typed, do you ever think about me? Then erased it. I locked the phone. Kevin said, that's all? I nodded. He shook his head. That's weak. I said, it still hurts. He said, of course it does. I checked again. Nothing. I called my parents. No answer. I texted Mom. No reply. I called Lucas. Blocked. I laughed. He blocked me. Kevin said, coward. I said, I have no family. Kevin said, you have me. I nodded. Thanks. Morning came. My eyes burned. Kevin said, come home. I said, okay. We drove. I showered. I stared at myself. You look stupid, I said. Kevin knocked. You okay? I said, I will be. He said, one day at a time. I said, I don't want to feel this. He said, you won't forever. Before he left for work he said, don't answer if they call today. I said, they won't. He paused. You're changing. I said, I know. He said, how? I said, something inside me is getting cold. He said, sometimes that's how people survive. I watched him leave. I sat alone. I said, I won't beg. I opened my phone and blocked Emily. Then I whispered, I'm done. I went to my parents' house that afternoon. My hands were steady but my chest felt hollow. I knocked. Mom opened the door and froze. Daniel. I said, we need to talk. She stepped aside. Dad sat on the couch. Lucas was there too. I stayed standing. I just want the truth. Dad said, you heard it already. I said, from you? Mom folded her arms. What do you want us to say? I said, why? She hesitated. Emily belongs with the stronger man. The words cut deeper than anything before. I said, stronger? She nodded. Lucas has more to offer. I laughed once. I gave her everything I had. Dad said, Lucas needs her more. I stared at him. So I don't matter. Dad said, that's not what I said. I said, it's exactly what you said. Lucas stood. Daniel, stop. I said, you don't get to speak. He sighed. We didn't plan this. I said, you planned it for months. Mom said, please don't raise your voice. I said, you raised me. She flinched. I said, I loved her. Dad said, people move on. I said, families don't. Mom said, this is hard for everyone. I said, no. This is easy for you. Silence. I looked at Lucas. Do you feel proud? He didn't answer. I looked at Mom. Do you feel like a mother? She looked down. I looked at Dad. Do you feel like a father? He said nothing. I picked up my jacket. This is the last time. Mom said, Daniel, wait. I said, I'm done waiting. Dad said, where will you go? I said, anywhere you aren't. I opened the door. Lucas said, you're being dramatic. I turned. You took my life. He said, no. I said, yes. I left. Outside the air felt sharp. I walked without knowing where. My phone buzzed. Olivia's name. I answered. Hey. Her voice shook. Can we meet? I said, where? The park. Now. Please. Okay. She was sitting on the bench. Her eyes were red. She stood and hugged me hard. I'm sorry. I said, you don't have to be. She pulled back. I do. I didn't stop them. I said, you're not them. She cried. I don't agree with them. I said, I know. She wiped her face. Mom said those things. I nodded. I heard. She said, that was wrong. I said, everything about this is wrong. She said, they won't listen. I said, I stopped trying. She grabbed my hand. You don't deserve this. I said, it's happening anyway. She said, I'm on your side. I looked at her. Thank you. She said, I won't abandon you. I said, that means more than you know. She hugged me again. Please don't disappear. I said, I won't disappear. I'll just change. She sniffed. Promise you'll be okay. I said, I will learn how. We talked until the sun dropped. When we stood to leave, she said, call me anytime. I said, I will. She watched me walk away. I didn't look back. That night in my small room, I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. I said, it's just me now. I thought about Mom's words. I thought about Dad's silence. I thought about Lucas's face. Something inside me went cold. I said, I won't need them. I opened my notebook and wrote, I will build my life without them. I closed it and whispered, this is my beginning. I signed the lease with shaking hands. Mr. Henderson slid the paper toward me and said, welcome home, Daniel. I looked around the small apartment and said, it's enough. He smiled. Most people say that at the start. I asked, what do you mean? He said, then they grow. I nodded. So will I. He handed me the keys. Rent's due on the 1st. I said, I won't miss it. He laughed. Everyone says that too. I dropped my bag on the floor. The place smelled empty. I said out loud, this is mine. The walls didn't answer, but the silence felt better than screaming. First day at work back, Kevin slapped my shoulder. Look alive. I said, trying? He nodded. Coffee later. Yeah. My manager waved. Daniel, meet Sarah. She looked up from her desk. Hi. I said, hi. She smiled. Kevin says you're the reliable one. I said, sometimes. She laughed. I'm Sarah. Daniel. She said, you look tired. I said, long week. She said, we all have those. She handed me a file. Help me with this? I said, sure. At lunch, Kevin said, you okay? I said, I'm breathing. He said, that's something. Sarah sat across from me. Kevin says you just moved. I said, yeah. She said, new starts are hard. I said, but necessary. She nodded. I like that. I said, what? She said, the honesty. I smiled for the first time that day. After work, I went to the gym. The guy at the desk said, first time? I said, first of many. He said, that's the spirit. I ran until my legs burned. I whispered, don't think. A man beside me said, push. I pushed. When I stopped, I was shaking, but I felt real. That night, Kevin called. Pizza? I said, no. He laughed. Who are you? I said, someone new. He said, proud of you. I said, don't get soft. He said, too late. Days passed. Work, gym, sleep, repeat. Sarah stopped by my desk. Lunch? I said, sure. She said, what's the plan? I said, survive. She smiled. Good plan. I said, what about you? She said, same. One evening my phone rang. Mom's name. I stared. It rang again. I said, no, I let it stop. I blocked the number. I blocked Dad. I blocked Lucas. My chest felt tight. Then lighter. I said, I choose me. At the gym, Kevin said, they called? I said, I blocked them. He paused. You sure? I said, yes. He nodded. Then keep moving. I lifted until my arms shook. Kevin said, stronger. I said, every day. Sarah met me outside work. You coming to the meeting? I said, yeah. She walked beside me. You seem different. I said, how? She said, focused. I said, I have to be. She said, whatever you're running from, you're doing it well. I said, I'm not running. I'm building. She smiled. Good. That night in the apartment, I wrote goals on a paper. Better job. More money. Calm mind. Strong body. I looked at the list and said, I will get there. The pain was still there like a quiet echo, but it didn't control me. I lay on the floor and stared at the ceiling. I'm still standing. The room felt small, but I felt larger. Before sleep, I checked my phone. No family. No messages. Only a text from Sarah. Good work today. I replied, thanks. I set the phone down and whispered, I can breathe. It had been months since I moved into my apartment. Life was steady. Jim, Sarah. Kevin called one afternoon. Danny, you won't believe this, he said. I said, what? He laughed softly. Lucas and Emily are struggling. I paused. Struggling how? He said, money. Fights. Mom and Dad helping them. I frowned. Helping them? Kevin said, they're digging a hole and the family's filling it. I laughed quietly. Figures. He said, don't sound too happy. I said, I'm not. He said, it's okay to feel something. I said, a little satisfaction. And sadness. He said, that's human. I hung up and stared at my hands. So much for perfect, I whispered. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text. I didn't go back. I just let the information sit like a weight in my chest. I said, they're learning the hard way. At work, Sarah said, you seem distracted. I said, I'm thinking about other people's mistakes. She laughed. That's dark. I said, reality is darker. She said, you've changed. I said, I have to. She nodded. Good change? I said, necessary. She smiled. That counts. I said, thanks. She looked at me. You're strong. I said, I'm learning. Evening came. I walked home past the small cafe where Kevin worked. I waved. He waved back. I said, anything else about them? He said, they're arguing again. Lucas blew money on a bad investment. Emily's mad. Mom and Dad are stressed. I said, poor things. Kevin frowned. You sound weird. I said, I'm just observing. He said, observing or judging? I laughed. Maybe both. I got home and dropped my bag. I checked my phone. No calls, no messages. The emptiness felt good. I whispered, freedom. I opened my notebook and wrote new goals. Save more, work harder, stay calm. The pain from before was still there, but I didn't need it controlling me. I said, I'm moving forward. Next morning, Kevin called again. Lucas and Emily just had another fight. Mom's covering for them financially. I swear, Danny, it's like watching a soap opera. I said, and I watch from the front row. He said, you're too calm about this. I said, I've survived worse. He said, true. I said, let them be. I have my own life now. At the gym that evening, I ran until my legs burned. Sarah caught up with me. Long day. I said, mentally. She said, wanna talk? I said, not really. She said, sometimes saying it out loud helps. I said, I'm fine. She smiled. Good. I nodded and ran another mile. I'm learning how to breathe, I said to myself. Later I cooked in the small kitchen. I hummed quietly. Kevin texted, you're not thinking about them, right? I typed back, a little. I put the phone down. And that's okay, I whispered. I felt the strange mix of satisfaction and sadness again, but I didn't dwell. I said, they will figure it out. I will figure me out. Before sleep I stared out the window. City lights shimmered. I said, I'm still standing. I'm still moving. I'm still me. The room felt calm. I felt calm. I whispered, no one can take this away. Not even them. I turned off the light. Tomorrow, I said, I keep moving forward. I found the envelope on my kitchen counter. No name on it, just my apartment address. I stared at it. My hands shook. I said, this can't be real. I tore it open. A folded letter fell out. I unfolded it slowly. Daniel, it began. My stomach sank. I whispered, Emily. The handwriting was familiar. My heart pounded. I read, I regret everything. I made a mistake. Lucas isn't who I thought. Please, can we talk? My vision blurred. I said, she's sorry? I read it again. I beg you, Daniel. Don't hate me. Please talk to me. I dropped the letter. It lay on the counter. I said, no, my chest burned. I picked it up again. I read it aloud. I made a mistake. Lucas isn't who I thought. I laughed bitterly. No kidding. Kevin called. You okay? I said, I got mail. He asked, from them? I said, yes. He paused. And? I said, it's a letter. He said, read it. I said, I did. He said, so? I said, she's sorry? Lucas isn't what she thought. She wants to talk. Kevin said, sounds tempting. I said, it's not. He said, why not? I said, I don't want that chaos back. Not ever. I stared at the envelope. I wanted answers. I wanted closure. I said it out loud. I crumpled the letter. Kevin said, burn it? I laughed. Exactly what I'm thinking. I grabbed a lighter. The paper caught fire. I watched it curl and blacken. I said, it's gone. Smoke curled into the air. I whispered, it doesn't matter anymore. Sarah came by. Everything okay? I said, better than okay. She raised an eyebrow. Burning mail? I nodded. Needed closure. She said, and? I said, I realized something. She waited. I don't want revenge. She smiled. Good. I said, I want peace. She said, peace is hard to find. I said, then I'll make it. I walked to the window. Night had fallen. City lights shimmered. I said, I can live without the lies. Without the pain. Without them. Sarah said softly, you've grown? I said, I had to. She said, it shows. I nodded. Every scar, every tear, every betrayal taught me. She said, and now? I said, now I choose me. Kevin stopped by later. So, letter burned? I said, yes. He said, no temptation to reply? I said, none. He said, good. That's strength. I said, not strength. Freedom. He nodded. Freedom is better than revenge. I said, much better. We sat on the small balcony. The air smelled faintly of rain. I said, I can breathe again. I went to bed that night with a calm mind. I whispered, no more looking back. I remembered Mom, Dad, Lucas, Emily. The pain was still there, faint but manageable. I said, it's my life now. My choices. My peace. I closed my eyes. I imagined the flames from the letter dying down, taking the last bit of chaos with them. I smiled. I'm free. Before sleep, I wrote in my notebook, I forgive myself. I forgive them. I moved forward. I put down the pen and whispered, this is peace. For the first time in months, I felt it. Warm, steady, mine. I breathed deep. Finally, I said. Finally, I'm free. I was at the gym when Kevin called. Danny, you need to sit down. I wiped sweat from my brow. What now? He said, Lucas's business, it failed. I froze. Failed? Completely? He said, yeah. Nathan Reed pulled out. Investors are gone. Lucas can't cover it. I laughed softly. Figures. Kevin said, you sound satisfied. I said, I'm not celebrating. Just noticing. He said, sure. Later I checked my phone again. Olivia texted, we need to talk. Something's coming. I replied, what? No answer. My stomach tightened. I whispered, always warning me. At the apartment, I poured water over my head and sat on the edge of the bed. Kevin called again. Mom and Dad, they lost a lot helping Lucas and Emily. I said, how much? He said, everything they had saved. Mortgage is nearly gone. I laughed bitterly. I guess their perfect life is crumbling. Kevin said, careful, Danny. I said, why? He said, don't let this poison you. You've earned peace. I said, I know. But it's satisfying. I walked to the window and stared at the city. The air felt heavier. I whispered, it's karma. Finally. I replayed Mom and Dad's words. Lucas needs her more. Emily belongs with the stronger man. I said, how strong is he now? Later, Olivia knocked. I opened the door. She looked worried. Daniel. I said, I know. I've been hearing. She stepped inside. It's worse than I thought. House money, it's all on the line. I nodded. I'm not going to intervene. She said, are you sure? I said, positive. This isn't my battle anymore. She said, still, it hurts seeing them fall. I said, it's life catching up with them. Consequences are real. She sat on the couch. Lucas and Emily, they fought today. I said, I imagine so. She said, Mom and Dad are stressed. They argue nonstop. I said, funny how the tables turn. She frowned. Don't let this get to you. I said, I won't. I've lived without them for months. I can watch now. Kevin stopped by later. You hearing this? I said, yeah. Karma is knocking loud. He laughed. Don't get too smug. I said, I'm not. I'm observing. He said, observing or enjoying? I said, both a little. He shook his head. Better keep your distance. I said, Distance is the plan. Peace is the goal. I went to the balcony at night. Olivia joined me. Daniel, do you ever think about revenge? I said, no. I want peace, not payback. She smiled faintly. You've grown. I said, I had to. Everything they did, it taught me who I am. She said, and now? I said, now I watch and stay steady. No chaos can touch me anymore. The phone buzzed. Kevin texted they lost it all. I smiled faintly. Finally. Olivia touched my shoulder. Be careful not to gloat. I said, I'm not. I feel lighter. Free. She nodded. Good. Keep it that way. That night I sat in my apartment. I thought about Lucas's failed business, Emily's panic, mom and dad's ruined savings. I whispered, everything they wanted, everything they thought they deserved, it's slipping away. I lit a candle. Smoke curled upward. I said softly, and I'm still standing. Still me. Still free. I closed my eyes. This is peace. I didn't need more than that. The city outside twinkled. Karma had knocked and I was watching, untouched. My phone rang just as I was finishing dinner. I glanced at the screen. Mom? My chest tightened. I answered. Daniel, it's me. Her voice cracked, trembling. Mom? I said softly. Daniel. I don't know what to do. I could hear her crying. Mom, slow down. What happened? She sniffled. We can't, the rent, everything is falling apart. I swallowed. What are you saying? She gasped. Can you help? Please, Daniel. You're still our son. You have to help us. I froze. My hands shook. Mom, I whispered. My chest felt hollow, empty. I said, after everything, after Lucas, after Emily, you want me to bail you out? She sobbed. We made mistakes. We were wrong. Lucas, her voice broke completely. We need you. I ran my fingers through my hair. And Emily? My voice was tight. She sniffled again. Gone. She left. She won't come back. I closed my eyes. So Lucas is broken, you're broken, and now you want me to fix it? She said, we need you. Please, Daniel. You're our son. You're all we have left. I felt a rush of anger, disappointment, and something colder. Mom, I don't exist in your eyes until you need something. She cried. We were wrong. We see that now. I paced the room. Do you even realize what this feels like? Watching Lucas take Emily and you, encouraging it. She sniffled. We thought it was best. We were blind. Please help us. Just this once. I said nothing at first. The silence was heavy. Then I asked quietly, Lucas? She said, he's broken. Nothing left. I swallowed. And you expect me to come back? After months of building my life. She whimpered. Daniel, just a little help, we can't survive. I sat down, phone pressed to my ear. Mom, do you know how empty I felt when I realized Emily left with Lucas and you all stood by? She sobbed. We were wrong. Please, forgive us. Help us. I whispered, I forgave you months ago. But that doesn't mean I owe you anything. She cried harder. We just don't know what to do. I said, I don't either. I don't even know if I want to help. This isn't love. It's desperation. She pleaded, Daniel, please, just help us with rent. That's all. I could hear Lucas in the background, muted, crying. Mom, this isn't what family is supposed to feel like. You don't get to take break and then expect me to save you. She said, we know. Please, we'll make it right. Just this once. Daniel, my chest tightened further. Mom, I don't know if I can. I sat quietly, phone pressed to my ear. Emily's gone, I whispered. Lucas is broken. I felt the weight of their failures press against me. And now you want me back? Just because you need a lifeline. She sniffled, barely audible. Yes, please. I looked at the wall, the apartment feeling smaller than ever. I whispered to myself, no. I can't go back. I won't. I'm done. I said to Mom, voice firm but calm, I can't help. You made your choices. Now you live with them. She cried, Daniel? I ended the call. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, heart hollow. Everything they wanted, everything they depended on. I would no longer be a part of it. Lucas broken, Emily gone, my parents desperate, and I stood apart. I whispered, this is the life I chose. I won't give it up. Not for them. Not ever. I opened the door to see my parents and Lucas standing there. Their expressions were a mix of relief and pride. Margaret Carter's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Robert Carter's jaw was tight. Lucas avoided my gaze, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I stepped inside slowly. Daniel, Mom said, voice trembling. We're sorry. I said, sorry isn't enough. You all made your choices. Dad spoke next. We know we've been wrong. Please forgive us. I said, I forgive you. But forgiving doesn't mean I'll save you. Lucas finally looked up. His eyes were clouded with shame. Daniel. I held up a hand. No. Just, listen. Mom sniffled. We never should have treated you like that. We see now, everything we did was wrong. I said, you see it now because you're desperate. That's not love, that's need. Dad said, we understand, son. We want to make amends. I said, amends don't erase the past. You want help? You'll get it, but only on my terms. Lucas shuffled his feet. I messed up everything. Emily, she left, and I cut him off. Lucas, don't blame her. Don't blame me. You made your bed. Sleep in it. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Please, Daniel, just help with rent. 1 month. That's all. I stared at her. The weight of their pleas was heavy. My chest felt tight, but I looked at Olivia's face in my mind. Her warning, her support. I whispered, for her 1 month. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the cash. I handed it to Mom. This is all I'll give. 1 month. After that, you manage. She grasped the money with trembling hands. Thank you, Daniel. I said, don't thank me. Remember, I'm not coming back. This is the only time. Lucas's head hung low. I understand. I said, good. Learn from this. He nodded slowly. The silence in the room was thick. I could feel their pride still lurking beneath the surface. I said, I forgive but I don't save. Understand? Dad swallowed hard. Yes, we do. Mom sniffled. We understand. I stepped back toward the door. Mom's voice cracked. Daniel, are you sure? I said, yes. I've spent months building my life. I won't throw it away. 1 month's rent, then nothing more. For Olivia's sake, I help. Not for you, not for Lucas, not for Emily. Lucas muttered, thank you, Daniel. I didn't respond. I only nodded. Walking out, I felt a strange mix of relief and weight lifted. The apartment door closed behind me. I whispered, this is the choice that defines me. My chest felt lighter, my steps steadier. I glanced back once. Mom, Dad, and Lucas were watching, pride and regret still tangled in their expressions. I said quietly, learn it now. Don't make me regret this one act of grace. Outside, the night air felt crisp. I breathed deeply. Olivia's face came to mind again, her eyes full of trust. I whispered, I made it for her. I walked down the street, one hand in my pocket, one hand relaxed. Freedom had a name and I carried it with me. No more debts to the past. No more chains. Just me, my life, and the future I choose. 1 month's rent. 1 act of kindness. 1 step away from chaos. I smiled faintly. This is who I am. This is who I'll always be. The city lights flickered around me as I kept walking. Each step, each breath, each choice, mine. And I would never let anyone take it away. Months passed and life settled into a rhythm I never thought I'd find again. Work became my anchor. One afternoon my phone buzzed. Daniel Carter, congratulations. You're promoted. I froze. Promoted? My boss, Mr. Henderson, smiled from across the office. You've earned it. Leadership position starts Monday. I exhaled, a weight lifting. Thank you. Really? At home I called Kevin. Guess what? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Kevin laughed. Finally, you get what you deserve? I smiled. Yeah. Feels good. He said, good for you? About time. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. It feels like a new chapter. That evening Sarah stopped by. Congratulations, Daniel, she said, eyes sparkling. I grinned. Thanks, Sarah. Couldn't have done it without you. She laughed. You did all the work. I shrugged. Maybe, but having you around makes everything lighter. Her cheeks flushed slightly. You really mean that? I nodded. Completely. I feel alive again. We sat on the balcony, city lights reflecting off her eyes. Daniel, you've changed, she said softly. I laughed. I had to. After everything, I had no choice. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. You seem happy. I nodded. I am. For the first time in months, maybe years. I no longer look over my shoulder. Work became a source of pride. I led projects, earned respect, and built a team that trusted me. One day Kevin said, "You're thriving, man. Really thriving." I smiled. Feels different, doesn't it? Knowing the past can't touch you. He laughed. Exactly. I said, I focus on now, on what I can control. That's all that matters. Sarah and I went out more often. Dinner, late night walks, coffee in the mornings. One night, she looked at me and said, "I like seeing this version of you." I held her hand. This is who I became, Sarah. Stronger, calmer, free. She smiled. And alive. I said, exactly. Alive. Sometimes I think about my family. Margaret, Robert, Lucas. But their chaos feels distant, like a story from someone else's life. I whisper, I forgave, I moved on. Their world is theirs, mine is mine. Kevin said, "You're finally untouchable." I laughed. Feels good to be untouchable. One evening, Sarah and I sat by the river, lights dancing on the water. "Daniel," she said, "what do you feel when you think of the past?" I said, "Clarity. Pain, yes, but clarity. I survived, I learned, and I moved forward. I chose me." She nodded. "And that's why you're happy." I smiled. Exactly. Happiness isn't chasing revenge or approval. It's living on my terms. I returned to the apartment one night and stared at the ceiling. I whispered softly, "I am free. I am alive. I am me." The city hummed outside, steady and indifferent. I felt my chest expand, my heart lighter than ever. Sarah's laughter echoed in my memory, Kevin's teasing voice, my own quiet confidence. I rose, stretched, and walked to the window. The city sprawled before me, endless possibilities. I whispered, "This is the man I became. Strong, free, alive. No shadows, no chains, no past to haunt me. Only the life I built and the love I chose." I smiled. Finally, I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. I didn't plan to see her. I was walking down the street, coffee in hand, morning sunlight warm on my face, when Emily Ross turned the corner. Her hair was a mess, eyes red and swollen. She froze when she saw me. I stopped too instinctively. "Daniel?" she whispered. I said nothing at first, just looked at her. Tears ran down her cheeks. I didn't know where to find you." I raised an eyebrow. "After everything, you just didn't know?" Her hand shook. I made a mistake, Lucas. I shouldn't have left with him." I tilted my head, studying her. There was no pride in her eyes, only regret. I said softly, "I can see that." She stepped closer. "Please, can we talk? I need to explain, to say I'm sorry." I shook my head. "Emily, it's too late for explanations." She cried harder. "But Daniel, I raised my hand. No, not this time." I felt nothing but calm. Her betrayal no longer burned inside me. No anger, no bitterness, only clarity. She looked at me with desperation. "I ruined everything. You deserve better." I was selfish. I interrupted, voice steady. "You don't get to measure what I deserve. That was yours to lose. And you lost it." She flinched at the words, but I meant no cruelty. Just truth. Emily's lips trembled. I wanted us. I shook my head gently. "Emily, you wanted comfort. You wanted Lucas. That was never my fault. That's your choice. Not mine." She sobbed, covering her face. I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. A breeze swept past us. I tucked my hands into my pockets. "Look, Emily. This ends here. I don't want revenge. I don't want pain. I want peace. And I have it." She looked up, disbelief and hope clashing in her eyes. I said, "You don't get to ruin my life anymore. I'm done letting you have power over me." Emily fell to her knees. "Daniel, please. I regret it all. Please." I knelt slightly to meet her eyes. "Emily, I hear you. And I forgive you. But forgiveness isn't a bridge back. It's a door forward for me. I've moved on. You should too." Her hands trembled as she wiped her face. I understand." She stood slowly. We were both silent for a moment, the city bustling around us but irrelevant. The sun climbed higher, casting gold across the pavement. I whispered softly, "This is the life I chose. Not revenge. Not pain. Only freedom." Emily looked at me one last time. "Daniel." I shook my head. "No more words. You have your path. I have mine." She nodded, tears still falling, then turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a weight lift I hadn't realized I'd carried. My chest expanded, my breath steady. I took a few steps, letting the morning sun warm me. For months, I'd wrestled with anger, betrayal, and regret. And now it was gone. Completely gone. I felt light, unburdened. Kevin had been right months ago, living for peace, not revenge. He had understood before I had. I walked back to my apartment, unlocked the door, and headed to the balcony. The city stretched below me, vibrant and indifferent. I sipped my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me. The horizon was tinged with pink and gold. I let the moment sink in. I whispered to myself, I earned this. No one had forced it, no one had given it to me. I had claimed it by walking away, by refusing to let the past dictate my life. The sun continued to rise, filling the city and my chest with light. Sarah's laughter from earlier lingered in my mind, Kevin's teasing smile. I felt the foundation of my life solid, steady. Everything I had lost, everything I had endured had led me here, to this freedom, to this peace. I leaned on the railing, feeling the wind against my face. The world below moved, chaotic and relentless, but I stood apart, unshaken. I whispered, I am alive. I am free. I am me. The warmth of the morning sun felt like a promise, a soft reminder that life, when chosen, could be mine entirely. Emily's chapter was closed. Lucas's chaos was distant. My family's failures were behind me. And I, Daniel Carter, stood on the balcony watching the sunrise, finally at peace. My chest felt full, my heart steady. I breathed deeply. This was my world, my freedom, my life, and I would never let anyone take it away.